Vienna, 1902, just as the imperial waltz echoed through Hofburg's marble halls, and the Empress's heir slipped away from her mother's birthday ball. Fiora Amalia Alden did not belong to the ballroom. She knew it from her first breath, too sharp of chin, too direct with her eyes, too quick with her opinions. But she wore the dress, dark green silk trimmed in black lace, her hair pinned in the imperial style, and the diamond clasp at her throat glittered with borrowed authority. Her mother, Empress Teresa of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, expected nothing less. Fiora had danced with 5 archdukes, 3 Hungarian counts, and 1 Polish prince by the time the clock struck 10. None of them had made her pulse rise. She slept out beneath a colonnade of marble pillars, where the night air was cool and carried the scent of linden blossoms. Her shoes clicked against the cobbles as she made for the private gardens behind the Hofburg. She wasn't alone. A man sat beneath the old bronze statue of Emperor Franz I, a leather-bound notebook resting on his knee, his coat threadbare and his boots scuffed. But his back was straight and his pen moved quick. He hadn't seen her yet. "You're trespassing," Fiora said. He looked up. His eyes were gray like storm-washed stone, and his face angular, unsmiling, was that of someone who had grown used to hunger and made peace with it. "I was invited," he replied, "to read a poem. Then read it." He hesitated, then stood. "It's not meant for royalty. I'm not royalty tonight." He flipped the page and began. She didn't remember the exact words, only the ache they left behind. Something about frost and fire, about crossing a frozen river barefoot with a torch in your hand. When he finished, he bowed slightly. "Your name," she said. "Ewan Pierce." She almost smiled. "That's an American name. My father was from Vermont. My mother was Viennese. They died in the same week when I was 15. I stayed. What do you do?" "I write. I teach Latin to boys who hate it, and I publish poems that no one reads." "Why are you here?" "I was asked to write a birthday verse for the Empress. I delivered it to the steward. They never let me in." Fiora glanced toward the ballroom windows, where light spilled out like liquid gold. "They're still serving champagne and pretending the world outside Vienna doesn't exist." "I know it exists," Ewan said. "I live in the 7th district. The bakery there stopped selling rye last week. Too expensive. Come with me," she said suddenly. "Where?" "Somewhere warm." He followed her without hesitation, down the servants' passage and into the narrow corridor that led to the Imperial Library. She unlocked it with a key at her waist. The chandelier above flickered to life as she lit the gas lamp. Books surrounded them, thousands of them volumes bound in red and gold, with spines that hadn't been touched in decades. "I come here when I need silence," Fiora said. Ewan ran his fingers along a shelf. "You hide in words, don't you?" He looked at her then, not as a subject looked at an heir, but as a man looked at a woman he was starting to want. Fiora took a step back, pulse leaping. "You should go." He nodded. "I should." But he didn't. They sat on the velvet chaise in the reading alcove, bodies angled toward one another but never touching. She asked about his favorite poets. He asked about her favorite escape. "Carriages," she said. "Fast ones. Outside the city. I ride until I can't see the domes. Then let me drive you. Tomorrow. I know a place past the vineyards. You're a poet, not a coachman. I'm both when I have to be." She hesitated, then nodded once. "Tomorrow. At dawn. The North Gate." When Ewan stood, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. "It's unfinished," he said, holding it out. "But it's yours." Their fingers brushed. The electricity of it startled her. He left by the servants' exit. Later that night, in her chamber, Fiora unfolded the poem. It was only a stanza, but it was raw and real and written in a hand still smudged with ink. She pressed it beneath her pillow and didn't sleep. At dawn, Fiora dressed in a traveling cloak and tied her hair beneath a plain bonnet. No guards. No attendants. Just her and the rising sun. At the north gate, Ewan waited beside a hired carriage, holding the reins. "You came," he said. "Drive." They rode through the city as it woke, past bakeries opening shutters and boys shouting headlines. Past the Danube Canal, into the vineyards of Grinzing. The road narrowed. The air sweetened. He stopped beside a crumbling stone chapel, half swallowed by ivy. "My mother brought me here," he said. "Once." They sat on the chapel steps, knees close. He handed her a flask of coffee, bitter and strong. She drank. "You should be at court. I'm not made for it. They need voices like yours. They don't want them. You don't know that?" He looked at her, hard. "Do you?" Her breath caught. He touched her hand. Just that, fingers over fingers. Not claiming. Just choosing. "I know," he said, voice low, "that you're not like them." Fiora didn't pull away. They heard hoofbeats. She rose too fast, heart thrumming. Ewan stood. "Someone followed you." "No," she whispered. "They followed you." 3 riders came into view, imperial guards, lances gleaming. At their head, Count Lucas von Hollenstein, her mother's advisor, and the man she was expected to marry. He dismounted, eyes cold. "Your Highness, come away from him." Ewan stepped forward. "Don't," Fiora said, voice sharp. But Ewan didn't listen. He placed himself between her and the Count. "She's under my protection. She is the Empress's heir, you insolent dog. And you are nothing. I'm the man she chose to ride with." The Count drew his sword. Fiora's breath froze. Ewan stared him down. "Name your place," the Count said. "And your seconds." "No," Fiora said, stepping between them. "This is madness." But Ewan met the Count's gaze. "At the chapel. Tomorrow. At dawn." Fiora turned to him, eyes blazing. "You will die." "I won't. You don't know how to fight him. I know how to stand." That night, she returned to the palace in silence. Her mother summoned her. Fiora refused to speak. In her chamber, she found another note beneath her tea tray. One line, written in haste. "You are the flame. I will not let them put you out." She held it against her heart and whispered his name like a prayer. Ewan. The chapel glistened with dew, its ivy leaves wet with morning. No bell tolled. No priest stood watch. Only stone, silence, and the breath of 2 men facing each other beneath a pale sky. Ewan's coat was too light for the chill, but he stood unshivering, sleeves rolled, eyes fixed on the nobleman across from him. Count Lucas von Hollenstein removed his gloves without hurry, as if preparing for a fencing demonstration rather than a duel that might end in death. Fiora stood at the edge of the clearing, her hands hidden in the folds of a wool cloak. She had not spoken since arriving. Her presence was not a plea or a protest, it was a witness. She would not look away. The seconds, one drawn from the Count's household, the other a quiet apothecary. Ewan had once written a sonnet for in exchange for a poultice measured the paces. The Count drew a rapier from a lacquered case. Ewan, lacking any such finery, held a blade borrowed from a retired soldier in the 7th district. It was heavier, less graceful. The duel began on the second signal. The Count moved like a man trained since childhood. Ewan, by contrast, fought as if every motion had been learned in back alleys and borrowed time. Yet he did not falter. He yielded ground but never gave up the center. Steel rang out, sharp and sudden, and once Fiora flinched not at a wound, but at the closeness of the Count's thrust to Ewan's throat. Minutes passed. Then Ewan slipped not from weakness, but from the weight of the borrowed blade catching at his wrist. The Count seized the moment, pressing forward with a cut aimed low. Ewan twisted, and the blade grazed his thigh. Blood darkened the fabric. He stumbled, caught himself, and stood again. The Count lowered his sword. "It's done." "No," Ewan said, voice ragged. "Not yet." Fiora's voice cut across the air. "It is. You've proven nothing but your vanity." The Count turned to her. "You disgrace your name. I protect it." He sheathed his blade with a sharp motion. "You will regret this." "I already do." The Count mounted his horse, and rode without another word. His second followed. Fiora rushed to Ewan's side. He had sunk to one knee, pressing a hand over the wound. She knelt beside him, lifting his arm to inspect the cut. "It's shallow," she said. "Still hurts like hell. Then you're alive." He let out a breath that trembled at the end. Fiora tore a strip from the lining of her cloak and wrapped it around his leg, tying it with quick fingers. "I thought you'd tell me not to fight," he said. "You didn't fight for me. You fought because he tried to take something that wasn't his. That matters more." Ewan looked at her, eyes unreadable. "And what are you, then?" "Someone who's tired of being spoken for." They leaned against the chapel wall, the sky breaking blue above them. No words passed for some time. Only the sound of wind through the vines. "I have to go back," she said finally. "I know. They'll tighten the reins. My mother. She'll want to marry me off within the month." He looked down at his bandaged leg. "Then I'll need to be able to walk by then." She smiled not brightly, but with something steadier. "You'll need to do more than walk," she said. "You'll need to be seen." He raised an eyebrow. "You said no one reads your poems," she said. "That's about to change." Ewan's brows drew together. "Because I fought a count? No. Because now I'll read them. And I'll make sure the right others do. I didn't write for courts. You didn't. But you wrote for truth. And I think it's time the court remembered what that sounds like." He looked away, not out of shame, but to hide the sudden heat in his eyes. Fiora stood and offered her hand. "Can you stand?" "With you, yes." He took it and rose, wincing slightly. They walked together down the path toward the road, her cloak half open, his stride uneven, but their pace matched. Later that day, in the palace's west wing, Fiora entered her mother's presence chamber without sending word. The Empress sat at a writing desk, ink drying on a decree. "You've been gone since dawn," the Empress said without turning. "I was at the chapel near Grinzing. You were seen." Fiora's voice was calm. "That I need not explain." The Empress turned. Her face bore no trace of warmth. "You are being watched by every ambassador in Vienna. What they see must not be chaos. Then let them see change." The Empress stood slowly. "He is nothing. He is honest. Honesty won't hold a throne. It will hold a heart." The Empress studied her daughter. "You're willing to lose everything. I'm willing to build something new." They stood in silence. At last, the Empress returned to her desk. "You have one season. If he proves worthy, I will not interfere." Fiora bowed her head, not as a daughter obeying, but as a woman acknowledging a line drawn in shifting ground. That evening, in a small flat above a tailor's shop, Ewan opened his door to find a sealed envelope bearing the imperial crest. He opened it with shaking hands. Inside, a single line in her hand. "You said you were both when you had to be. Be both now. Be more." He pressed the paper against his chest. He would be ready. Fiora stood before the mirror in the imperial portrait chamber, the morning light filtering through tall arched windows to catch against the deep amber of her gown. She had chosen it deliberately modest in cut, unadorned save for a row of opal buttons and altogether too plain by court standards. Behind her, the court painter waited in silence, brush poised. "I've changed my mind," she said. The man stiffened. "Your Highness? No portrait today." She stepped away from the dais, drew the velvet curtain close behind her, and left the room without another word. In her mind, she was already making calculations. There were only so many weeks left in the season, and everyone mattered. Ewan's name was beginning to circulate, thanks to a quiet mention in the Neue Freie Presse, and a reading attended discreetly by the wife of a Bohemian archduke. But whispers were fickle. They needed something louder. That afternoon, she walked through the gates of the Akademisches Gymnasium, her presence drawing startled bows from the Latin master and the headmistress alike. She found Ewan in the staff room, hunched over a stack of student compositions, his knuckles stained with ink. "You came here?" he asked, standing quickly. "I need you to write a speech." "What kind of speech?" "The kind they'll remember." He folded his arms. "I thought you didn't want declarations. This isn't for me. It's for the Founding Day Jubilee. My mother's agreed to let me speak." He blinked. "You want me to write words for the heir to the empire. I want you to write words for the people she'll serve." He looked past her to the window, where the bells of Stephansdom echoed faintly in the distance. "If I do this," he said, "I'll need to know what you want it to say." She stepped closer, her voice low. "I want it to say that we are more than our names." He exhaled slowly. "Then we'll need stronger ink." The following week passed in a rhythm of quiet urgency. Ewan wrote in the evenings, his lamp burning late into the night. Fiora sent books from the palace library, essays by reformers, speeches from the 1848 Assembly, letters written by widows to the emperor's ministers. Ewan read every one. They met in the botanical annex behind the Schönbrunn hothouses, where the glass walls trapped warm air, and the scent of jasmine clung to their clothes. She would bring tea, and he would read her lines, shaping them with her feedback, his voice growing steadier each time. One afternoon, as the sun slanted through the glass panes, she reached for his notes, and their hands touched across the page. He didn't move away. "I've never been this close," he said softly. "To me? To belonging." She looked at him, not as the heir, not as a woman burdened with duty, but as someone who understood. "I feel closest to myself when I'm with you," she said. His thumb brushed gently over her knuckles. "Do you know how long I've needed to hear that?" She didn't answer. She only leaned forward, forehead resting lightly against his. They stayed like that, quiet, breathing the same air until the bells rang for vespers. The day of the Jubilee arrived with a sky-streaked rose and gold. The Heldenplatz was already crowded by mid-morning, carriages lining the Ringstrasse, nobles and merchants and students pressing shoulder to shoulder against the cordons. Fiora stood behind the podium, the speech folded in her gloved hands. She saw Ewan at the edge of the square, standing beside a group of apprentices from Leopoldstadt. He wore his best coat, patched carefully at the elbow, and he met her gaze with a calm that steadied her. She began. Her voice carried across the square, shaped by Ewan's words and her conviction. She spoke of shared burden, of the weight of names and the strength of those without them. She called for schools with heat in winter, and bread in every street corner bakery. She spoke of poetry and policy, of kindness as law. She ended not with a flourish, but with a promise to listen, to change, to stand where the people stood. Silence followed, heavy and full. Then came applause, not polite, not practiced, but rising like rain breaking over rooftops. That night, the Empress summoned her. "You've turned my city into a chorus of petitioners," she said. "I've turned it into a place where they believe they are heard." The Empress studied her for a long time. "He's still writing for you. He's writing for everyone. I'm simply the one who asked." The Empress stepped to the window. "If you continue this path, It will not be a quiet life. I do not want a quiet life. You are never meant for one. Outside, the city flickered with gaslight and song. Inside, Fiora stood unmoved, her choice no longer a question. 3 days later, an invitation arrived at Ewan's door. Not a summons, not a request, a formal card written in the Empress's own hand, inviting him to dine at the Hofburg. No title. No station. Just his name. He arrived in a tailored coat borrowed from a friend, shoes polished until the worn leather shone. Fiora met him in the antechamber, her expression unreadable, until the door closed behind them. I did what I said I would, she said. And now, she whispered, we decide the rest together. She took his hand, palm to palm, and led him forward, not as a secret, not as a rebellion, but as her choice. And he followed, not as a man dazzled by power, but as one who had seen her heart and vowed to stand beside it. The invitation to dine had opened a door, but not all thresholds were easily crossed. Ewan stood in the imperial antechamber once again, but this time his coat was his own, pressed by the seamstress in Jostad, who insisted on sewing a new collar for the occasion. His boots, though well worn, had been scrubbed clean by a neighbor's boy in exchange for a recitation of Cicero. He carried no cane despite the lingering pain in his thigh. He refused to show weakness within the Hofburg's walls. Fiora entered wearing a gown of slate blue velvet, high-collared and unadorned, her hair bound in a style no longer fashionable among the ladies of court. He noticed that immediately. She had chosen clarity over ornament. You're early, she said, her tone quiet but not uncertain. I didn't want to be introduced by a steward. I told him not to announce you. Ewan's eyes moved to the tall doors ahead. Will she eat with us? She will, Fiora nodded. And she'll listen. She's not used to anyone disagreeing with her. She's used to me. The doors opened not by ceremony, but by a servant's discreet hand. The Empress stood already at the table, where only 3 places were set. No music played, no chamberlain waited behind her chair. This was not courtly theater. It was a reckoning. Ewan bowed, not low but precise. Your Majesty. She studied him, her lips unsmiling. You walked here? I did. In the rain? He nodded once. It was light when I started. She gestured to the table. Sit. They did. The meal was spare roasted pheasant, celeriac, a thin broth, and no wine was poured. Fiora lifted her spoon and began to eat without comment. Ewan followed, though his throat felt dry. The Empress touched nothing on her plate. Do you consider yourself a revolutionary, Mr. Pierce? No, Majesty. Yet you write like one. I write what I see. And what do you see now? A woman who rules with precision, and a daughter who's learned from it. Fiora's spoon paused just above her bowl. The Empress leaned back. You know what they call you. In the salons. I've heard worse in the alley behind my school. Yet you sit at my table. I was invited. The Empress's eyes narrowed. Are you in love with her? Ewan met Fiora's gaze before answering. Yes. The Empress looked between them, then reached for her cup. It held only warm water, and she sipped slowly before setting it down. You'll never have a title. I don't want one. You'll be resented. I already am. The Empress stood. I had a suitor once. Before I married the Emperor. A physician's son. He taught me to ride. He disappeared one spring. No record of where he was sent. Fiora's voice was steady. You never told me that. I intended you to marry differently than I did. I'm not marrying to escape. The Empress turned toward the windows, where gaslight from the lanterns outside shimmered on the rain-slicked panes. Then you'll need a new household. One that doesn't depend on court alliances. I won't fight this. But I won't protect it either. Fiora stood. We'll manage. Ewan rose beside her.
We already are.
The Empress did not turn again.
Then go. There's a carriage waiting.
The door closed behind them with the softest click. They didn't speak until the horses had pulled away from the palace gates. Fiora's hands were folded neatly in her lap, but her shoulders eased only when they reached the bridge over the Vienne River.
She told me once that silence was a kind of power,
she said.
Today it was. She'll never embrace you. She doesn't have to.
Fiora looked at him.
But I do.
The carriage turned down a narrow lane near the university, past shuttered bookshops and shuttered cafes. It stopped before a 3-story house with ivy creeping up its west side. Ewan stepped down first, then offered his hand. Inside, the sitting room was modest. 2 chairs, a worn rug, a fire that had burned low. A small writing desk stood by the window, cluttered with paper and a chipped inkwell. Fiora crossed to it and picked up a page.
You're still working on this?
She asked.
It's not finished.
She read the first line aloud.
A name is not a promise, only a request. I didn't write it for the press. I didn't ask you to.
She set the page down.
You'll need a larger desk. And better light. I'll need a better pen.
She turned to him.
Then we'll buy one. Together.
They stood in the quiet of ordinary things. The ticking of the clock, the creak of the floorboard beneath her heel, the soft drag of her sleeve as she reached for his hand. He kissed her, then unhurried, certain not because they were alone, but because they no longer had to hide. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his.
This is where we begin. It's already begun,
he said.
Now we build.